At some point, it's going to come to that, a boycott. I really believe that's the only language left, the only lever, the only way to kind of, fight for what's ours. That was the world number one, sitting in a press room in Rome on a Wednesday, her 28th birthday no less, looking into a row of microphones and telling the tennis establishment that the Grand Slams might one day see empty locker rooms. Because the numbers don't lie, she said, because the show is on us. Without us there is no tournament, without us there is no entertainment, so yes, we deserve more. A few hundred meters away from that air-conditioned media center, at the exact same hour on the exact same afternoon, May 6, 2026 at the Foro Italico, a 20-year-old who wasn't seeded, who carried a ranking of 42nd in the world, who didn't have a single Grand Slam title to her name, walked onto a small, marble-ringed court called Stadio Nicola Pietrangeli. It holds 3,720 people. There wasn't an empty seat left. That is not a metaphor, that is not hyperbolic commentary, that is what the ticket office reported. One press conference threatened to empty the sport's biggest stages. One match had already filled one of the sport's most beautiful stages to the rafters, without a single poster campaign, without a premium session price hike, without a headline billing alongside Goff or Berrettini. Let me rewind slightly, because the contrast that unfolded on that Wednesday is the kind of story Rome did not see coming, and the kind of story that the WTA's commercial machinery is still trying to process. Aryna Sabalenka, four-time major champion, top seed in Rome, the most consistent number one of the last 3 years, delivered one of the most commercially loaded press statements the women's tour has heard in a long time. She said, "We are girls who really can easily get together and go for some things. Some of the things I feel like are really unfair to the players. I think at some point it's going to get to this." That language, collective action, unfairness, a coming breaking point, was aimed squarely at prize money gaps and revenue distribution. And on paper, she is not wrong to raise it, but timing is a cruel editor. Because while those words were being transcribed by journalists, Alex Eala, unseeded, unsung, and until that day winless in Rome across her entire career, was out on that tiny Pietrangeli court, proving that the entertainment Sabalenka spoke of does not actually require a world number one to exist. Let me tell you about Eala's week leading into that afternoon. 9 days before Rome, she was in Madrid and it went badly. Not just a loss, a demolition. Elise Mertens, that grizzled Belgian veteran of top 20 clay wars, handed her a 2-6, 1-6 defeat in the second round. That's the kind of scoreline that follows a young player like a shadow. It gets replayed in highlight clips. It gets cited in commentary as evidence of a gap in class. It can hollow out a player's confidence for weeks. 9 days later, she's in Rome and the draw gives her Magdalena Frech, a former top 25 player, a woman who has beaten top 10 opponents, a first-round opponent that no first-time Rome winner would ever ask for. So when you hear that the Pietrangeli was sold out before Eala even struck her first serve, you have to understand, that crowd wasn't there because they expected an easy win. They were there because they had been watching something build. And what built was this. Iga lost the first set. No, she won at 6-0, dominant, clinical, the kind of set that makes a 3,720-seat stadium feel like a library. Then Frech, to her immense credit, adjusted, broke Iga's rhythm, took the second set 3-6. Now the match was alive and the crowd was louder, not quieter. Then the third set, Iga went down a break. In a different year against a different narrative backdrop, that's where the fairy tale ends. But she broke back, she steadied her nerve, she served it out 6-4, her first ever victory at the Italian Open, verified, recorded, done. And when she turned to face those 3,720 people who had paid whatever last-minute premium prices necessary to be inside that marble postcard of a stadium, she didn't scream. She didn't pump a fist like she was performing for a highlight reel. She just waved, quiet, direct, earned, and the crowd answered for her. Now put yourself in the shoes of the tournament director who was watching real-time attendance data that afternoon. Your flagship session on center court, the one you promoted most heavily, the one that listed Sabalenka, Goff, and Berrettini together on the same card, 3 of the biggest names in tennis stacked like planes waiting for takeoff, needed all 3 of them just to move 10,500 tickets. And even then, Italian fans had been posting furious messages on social media all week about last-minute price spikes on those premium sessions. One quote captured the mood: "They have no shame whatsoever." Tickets for those sessions were still listed on resale platforms hours before play. Meanwhile, on the other side of the grounds, a 3,720-seat court that's ringed by marble statues of ancient athletes, the most photographed venue in all of tennis, was completely sold out. Not for a seed, not for a Grand Slam champion, for Alex Eala. The Philippine flag draped every section. The chants of "Alex, Alex," echoed off those marble figures in a way they were never acoustically designed to handle. Dian Castillejo, the legendary ABS-CBN broadcaster and one of the most respected Filipino sports journalists to ever hold a microphone, was physically in the Jelly stands that day. She has covered decades of Philippine sports milestones, and her dispatch from Rome that evening was not a measured analysis. It was 4 words and a feeling: Pinoy pride in Italia. That is the testimony of someone who knows when something is different. When a journalist of that caliber abandons measured language for a 4-word exclamation, you pay attention. Here is the deeper irony, and it cuts both ways. Sabalenka's argument, "Without us there wouldn't be a tournament," carries real institutional weight. She is the face of this era. When she speaks, the sports commercial machinery listens. But on that Wednesday, while she was speaking to a room of journalists, a sold-out stadium full of Filipino supporters was demonstrating that the entertainment she was talking about can be generated by a 20-year-old ranked 42nd who had never won a match in Rome before that afternoon. The authority in Sabalenka's quote is real. The irony in its timing is inescapable. And here is where the story becomes a pattern, not a one-off. Madrid, just weeks earlier, told the same story. Courtside seats for A-list sessions in the Spanish capital were moving at premium prices independent of any official WTA campaign, driven by the same phenomenon. 2 consecutive WTA 1000 events, 2 separate cities. 2 sold-out or near sold-out atmospheres generated by a player without a seating. First Madrid, then Rome. That is not coincidence, that is market behavior. That is an audience finding its player before the tournament's marketing budget does. Now let's talk about what comes next, because the rematch is already here. Eala's round 2 opponent in Rome is Wang Xinyu, the same Wang Xinyu who knocked her out of this very tournament in round 1 last year. Eala has spoken publicly about that loss as a reference point, a scar, a lesson, a piece of fuel. Everything about that Wednesday win, the comeback from a breakdown in the third, the sold-out crowd, the first-ever Rome victory, was prologue. The rematch answers whether the narrative has turned or merely paused. And after Rome, the French Open draw drops in 2 weeks. May 24th, Roland Garros. Tournament directors from Rome to Paris are already watching how this plays out. The same week that Sabalenka's boycott threat became the WTA's dominant news cycle, Eala quietly reminded the sport what organic audience gravity looks like. Philippine sports media is already mobilizing travel packages. The Filipino diaspora across Europe is already tracking her half of the bracket. The question of whether Eala makes a deep run at a clay court Grand Slam, and what that would mean for crowds on Chatrier or Linglan, has shifted from hypothetical to imminent. But before Paris, there is a more immediate reckoning in Rome, and there is a larger question worth holding in your mind as you watch the second round. When Eala was asked after the French win about what carried her through that third-set breakdown, down a break, crowd roaring 9 days removed from a 1-6 bagel line in Madrid, she didn't reach for a dramatic declaration. She didn't talk about boycotts or unfairness or what the sport owes her. Her answer was precise, honest, and almost disarmingly small. "I was just very happy that I was able to come back after being down a break and find the confidence in my game and play aggressive again." No embellishment, no victim narrative, just a player who 9 days after Madrid, down a break in the third on a court packed with 3,720 people who needed her to hold her nerve, decided to play aggressive again. That is the entire answer. The marble figures that ring Jelly have stood there since the 1930s. They have watched nearly a century of clay court history, championship points, upsets, tears, triumphs. On May 6, 2026, they watched a 20-year-old from the Philippines, ranked 42nd in the world, fill every seat in the building and complete a comeback win 9 days after eating a bagel in Madrid. And on that same afternoon, the world number 1, 4 Grand Slams, a full press corps, the most marketed player in the sport, sat in a press room and told tennis that it needs to pay her more. That is not a critique of her argument. Prize money gaps are real. The women's game deserves a serious conversation about revenue, but that Wednesday was a portrait of 2 players relating to their audience in completely opposite ways. One demands the room, the other earns it. Sabalenka said, "Without us, there wouldn't be entertainment." On Wednesday in Rome, the entertainment was already sold out. It just wasn't sitting in the press conference. So here is the question worth staking a prediction on. If Eala gets past Wang Xinyu, if she wins that rematch, if she advances to round 3 on Rome's center court, can she fill 10,500 seats at the Foro Italico faster than the world number 1 can? And what happens to the ticket market, to the premium pricing model, to the entire promotional machinery of the tournament if she does? Drop your prediction below, because this channel tracks every match, every ticket surge, and every press conference that accidentally makes its own point. If you are already following this story, you're not late, but the Roland Garros draw drops in 2 weeks and the conversation is about to get louder. Subscribe now and be part of the record when it does.